Hello and welcome to WestMusings, 10-minute museum talks, brought to you with thanks to Wells Fargo, as well as Hawkins, Delafield, and Wood, together with our friends here at the Computer History Museum, sponsored by Box.org. The recording this evening and post-production are made possible by Soulstream Studios. Thank you all so much for being here. It's my honor and privilege to introduce Maria Mortati. Maria, I first came to know as one of the very first people who ever introduced to me the idea of pop-up, and it feels like it was so long ago. She's recently completed a very successful project for the Baltimore Museum of Art, and I know that she was also part of producing an installation that complemented the Cat Video Festival. When we reached out to Maria and asked her to be a part of this, she said, "Why should we be speaking about visitor engagement when the world is on fire?" With that in mind, I introduce you to Maria Mortati.
Thanks, James. Hi. Last year, the Oakland Museum gave me an open-ended invitation to do a project with their community. Now, as you may know, their community is immigrant and predominantly financially struggling. There was a line in the grant that funded the project which said that these folks didn't come to the museum because they didn't see themselves reflected there. And so I called my project Tell Me Where the Mirrors Go. Originally, I set out to do something that would engage a single family, their home, and the art collection at the museum. My idea was that the ideas or the artworks in a museum are certainly owned by the donors and the institution, but the ideas themselves are free. However, it turned out the family I wanted to work with was homeless, and they were living in a motel, so I began again and decided to do a project where I would let them lead. I'd like to introduce you to the Guzman Mondragon family of Oakland. This is the mom, Sylvia. She is studying to be a translator. This is Magro, the dad, who is a builder with a bit of an entrepreneurial streak. This is Sylvia's daughter, Gloria, who was about 12 when we started the project, and she's an aspiring spoken word artist. And these are their twins, Jeremias and Leonardo. They celebrated their 6th birthday at the museum, and they thought that I lived there. Over the course of many months, we had visits and meetings and discussions where we explored and talked about their challenges with the institution and their desires for it, which they reflected back to me through a series of documentation that they produce as well as we produce together. The project resulted in events and tours. Here you see Sylvia and Magro leading a tour. Sylvia did all the interpretation and translation for the project, and she did all the translation for the tours as well. It was important to me that not only were they compensated for their participation in this project, but that they also got something practical out of it. And in her case, she got some experience she could put on a resume. Gloria also put together a little short poem, a spoken word piece for the project. This also resulted in events, family events that the museum developed along the lines of the theme of the project, as well as a mini documentary and entry experience to the galleries. And finally, there was an interpretive experience that was throughout the art galleries, and it was adjacent to works of art that the museum found interesting, confusing, or relevant to their experience. And everything in the exhibition and the project privileged Spanish over English to sort of underscore their place. Here's a little clip.
Yeah, I'm reacting.
If there was a little more sense of freedom around, like Laura was saying, maybe some music or something. Mm-hmm. When they say museum, it's like, oh, really?
Yeah.
It's like we have to be quiet. Mm-hmm. Right. We can't do anything. We can't touch.
A lot of people don't like to come to the museums.
Right, yeah. Mm-hmm.
I don't know why, but
right.
Maybe they don't. Sometimes we have a lot of problems before to think about to go to museum. When you think about rent, first, I'm sure you could go by my area and you could interview people, never go to the museum.
I just hope the world doesn't end up being the way I see it. I want it to end up being a lot brighter.
So that's Gloria. After the shooting for that video, I took her to the cafe as a little treat. However, she couldn't make sense of the fancy mac and cheese. And it was really frustrating to me that a basic amenity such as food was alienating to this kid. After all, I'd gone to pretty great lengths to make sure that they all felt very comfortable at the museum. And that moment in the project began a tipping point for me and began to undermine a central premise to my work. I've spent a lot of time working on projects where I'm trying to engage the public in ideas that are sometimes complicated or difficult. And it's sort of characterized by how do we prepare contemporary people for museums. But in this project, I realized that that premise was fundamentally flawed, and really what we need to be doing, what I wanted to be doing, was how do we prepare museums for these contemporary people instead of how do we prepare us for them. This project raised many more questions than it answered in the end, from the very obvious to how can you be free when they're free? They work 6 days a week, so Sunday's the only day that they're going to be able to come to the museum, especially as a family. To the practical, if you want to do projects such as this with them, then how can you compensate them? And how can you make projects such as this a funding priority for your institution? To the more internal, which is how can you prioritize relevance over participation? Now, participation is great. Comment cards and Post-it notes in exhibitions are terrific. However, relevance is a much bigger draw. And that also requires much more heavier lifting on our parts as museum professionals. Ultimately, I began to think about who at your museum can do some of this heavy lifting and grapple with both the world of their world and the world of your institution. How could we start to imagine what their future looks like every day? In other words, how could we make their concerns our concerns? Tell Me Where the Mirrors Go really ultimately foregrounded this question of who are you responsible to? And in fact, that became the central organizing principle which gave this project a tremendous amount of focus. I would suggest to all of you that this is a question that we should have an answer for. At the end of the day, the Oakland Museum was really brave to let me do this project, to embrace and ask these questions. And in fact, they didn't edit me at all. And I was so honored to work with this family. They have become now a filter through which I view all my work moving forward. Thank you.